Hey guys, Oregon Templar here. So this is a video Matthew requested me to make. What are my thoughts on Mennonites and the United Church? Why I rejected the faith I was raised in, and why I just dislike it. Now, there's the most obvious reason that they're dildo, that they're both extremely liberal, and they accept everything. So they're inherently opposed to my political views. The United Church has long been unofficially aligned with every left-wing movement possible. They proudly fly the gay flag at most of their churches. They have it more prominently displayed than crosses because liberalism's their religion. They did one of their long-term projects is a boycott against all products made in Israel. I'm not like a shill for Israel, but they do that for left-wing reasons. It's not for any sort of principled reason. It's just because they're leftists, and in Canada that's the generic left-wing thing to do, is hate on Israel. So they do stuff like that. They let atheists be ordained as ministers. They supported gay marriage, supported abortion, supported everything, all forms of social degeneracy. The Mennonites, I believe, are largely the same. They're a bit different just because most of the people who make it up, because it has absolutely no appeal as a religion to young people. So most of the people who made it up are just old, and they may not just be engaged in this stuff. And I find they're extremely naive and foolish, and they don't understand that society's changing, and they don't really seem to care about it so long as I have my retirement fund and I have my health care. Then I don't care about societal degeneracy. So on that basic principle, I couldn't be a member of a religion where the entire hierarchy, the entire belief system is completely and utterly opposed to my political views, to the point where they aren't really religions anymore so much as they are just political parties at prayer. That being said, my more personal issue, because obviously when I was that age my political views aren't what they are now. With regards to Mennonites, a core aspect of Mennonite theology, and Mennonites don't really have a theology because they're part of the Radical Reformation, so they just reject basically everything, including the concept of a clergy and having a formal theology, because they regard reason as being bad. I'm not sure. They probably originally rejected reason because it's some sort of, like, they saw it as paganism, but now they just reject it because it's associated with Catholicism, and they hate Catholicism for no real reason. It's just because it's an old beef and it's like nostalgia. They just hate it because historically they hated it, and there's no real reason for it anymore. A lot of them will, like, openly embrace Islam and Muslims, but they will despise Catholics. So they would be more likely, a lot of them, to like, if they had to pick between being friends with a member of ISIS and being friends with a practicing Catholic, they'd probably pick the member of ISIS. And it's just very hypocritical, superficial bullshit. So personally speaking, Mennonite theology is kind of a world-rejecting form of Christianity. There's a strong disdain for technology, the modern world, etc., and a disdain for nations, for government in general, for any type of human progress, I suppose you could say. There's often a just lack of belief that the broader society matters, just a rejection of it, a rejection of most things we would associate with civilization and kind of culture. A lot of the more conservative ones are kind of like anarcho-primitivists. The most conservative ones refuse to use cars. The more liberal ones basically use most forms of technology, but they're very hypocritical and self-righteous about it, because they'll do some things but not other things, and then they'll claim to be morally superior because of it. There's a whole-scale rejection of violence as part of it, to just extreme pacifism. Like, if your house gets invaded, you're just supposed to let them rape your wife, etc. But they also rely upon the police and the military of the country they live in to solve disputes. So they're okay with violence, but only if other people do it, so they can't get their hands dirty. And they just oppose all wars, and don't make differences between them. So I personally am the complete opposite of all of that. I like technology. I like economic development. I'm interested in geopolitics and the broader society. I think culture matters. I think civilization matters. I just don't particularly like or have time for anarcho-primitivism. I don't want to live on a farm and raise cattle. I don't really want to drive a horse and buggy. I like modern movies, I like video games, etc. It just holds no appeal to me. I think it's actually the reason I hated Christianity was because I thought all Christians were like Mennonites, who were weakling cowards, who lacked any sort of moral compass. Because the idea that it's wrong to defend your wife if she's being raped, that you're just supposed to like stand there and take it, was just abhorrent to me, and it's still abhorrent to me. So you're just supposed to let people steal shit from you. You're not supposed to ever fight back, because all violence is bad, and etc. And there's often a self-hating part of it, like, oh, we're so sorry for the Crusades are the worst. Oh, the Inquisition, oh, it's all terrible. Oh, we're so sorry. And that's inherent to most forms of liberal Protestantism, is kind of white guilt and self-hatred, and I find that fairly common in Mennonites. I just find them naive. I also just find the whole thing hypocritical, because they're like, oh, we're so morally righteous because we don't like the modern world, but we support all the, or we don't, yeah, like, we don't like the modern world, but we're okay with all forms of societal degeneracy, and we don't believe you should do anything about it. So a lot of people will probably see this and be like, oh, okay, it's great. They're like anarcho-primitivists, they're traditionalists, but they aren't, because they accept all forms of social liberalism. I'm not sure. The Mennonite church probably marries gays. But, so yeah, they're traditionalist, I guess, somewhat in terms of their lifestyle, but they make exceptions to it whenever it suits them, while maintaining all this self-righteous, we're better than you mentality. So basically it's just kind of Swipple shit. It's kind of like the forerunner to Swipples. And they're all involved in like going to third world countries and doing aid work and missionary stuff, mainly in Catholic countries, because Catholicism is of the devil. They don't ever explain why it's of the devil. It's from like some delusion that the early church was like Mennonites, which there's no evidence of. But yeah, aside from this vaguely defined belief to be like simple and to reject wealth and reject the world, there is no theology. I remember I got into fights with the few times I spoke to them, with Mennonite ministers, and like, could you explain the Trinity to me? And they said, oh, we don't know, we don't really define anything. I'm like, well, can you defend the Bible? No, we don't really defend the Bible, we don't really have any arguments. You can't really, like, faith is just faith, man, you just have to believe in it. and they have no arguments for anything. They have no concept of apologetics. There's a complete rejection of philosophy and science as having anything to do with faith. There's a complete rejection of having an ethical code, really, of having a theology at all, of having any kind of structure. You just have the Bible and you have personal faith. And some of them even reject that. And maybe you go to church, but it's more of a social thing with no real spiritual meaning. And then everything's good. And they also have female ministers. So people are like, oh, the Mennonites are so traditional. Well, they have female ministers and they accept all social liberalism. Same with the United Church. The United Church doesn't even really believe in God anymore. They don't really believe in anything that I can determine. They have no theology. They have no doctrine. They're self-hating. I remember back when my parents tried to send me to Christian summer camp. I tried to ask questions and they'd get angry at me and they were like, no, don't. You can't ask questions. Or they just flagellate themselves. They were like, yes, the Crusades were evil. There were no Christians involved in the Crusades. So a lot of these people seem to believe that Christianity didn't exist before their particular denomination was created. So like before 1920, when the United Church was formed, there was no Christianity. It just didn't exist. So it's just so shallow. It's just kind of shallow. Look at me, I'm so great. Bullshit. There's no substance to it. You can't have a theological discussion. There is no doctrine. There's no support for how to live your life, because they're just social liberals. They're just social liberals who believe in God. So even that's self-serving, because in their religion, their faith asks nothing of them. It doesn't ask them to be a better person. It doesn't ask them to have obligations to anyone. All it does is just say, it is just like, it's just self-gratification. It's literally just like autoerotic almost, because it's like, oh, well, my faith forgives me my sins and I get to go to heaven, and God just says everything I do is cool, and fuck society. So a lot of these groups just believe that society can't have standards, society can't have anything, because it's all just kind of extreme individualism. And that's what Protestantism, liberal Protestantism is it's extreme individualism plus God in a very vaguely defined sense. I don't even think they believe in the Trinity. It's so shallow, and it's so self-righteous, and it's so just big. It's frankly extremely bigoted, because they hate everybody who's not like them. That's the irony of social liberalism, is this complete hatred for anyone who's not like them. They despise Catholics. They despise conservatives. I've heard many of them talk about wanting to kill conservatives and kill people like me. So they'll advocate violence. I know I've met Mennonites who say, oh, we should gas everyone who's a member of the NRA. So they aren't actually pacifists at all, really. They're just kind of self-righteous swipples. And that's how I feel about most liberal Protestants. And it really pisses me off, because they're just so intellectually lazy, so self-indulgent, so just enamored with themselves and how great they are. Their religion is just a form of status signaling. It asks nothing of them. It requires no commitment from them. It's just hollow self-gratification. And that's why I hated it, because I do believe that all men must serve, and that you have a duty to do things like to fight evil. But Protestantism, in particular liberal Protestantism, offers none of that. It's just empty. It's just empty, generic leftism masquerading as a religion. This is Argent Templar signing out.